this meeting on the Defense Subcommittee to order. This is a hybrid meeting, so I'm going to have to do a few housekeeping matters to make sure everyone knows what's going to happen and how this is going to work. Members joining virtually, once you start speaking, there's a slight delay before you're displayed on the main screen. Speak into the microphone because it will activate the camera displaying the speaker on the main screen. Do not stop your remarks if you're not immediately seeing the screen switch. If the screen does not change after several seconds, please make sure you are not muted. To minimize background noise and ensure correct speaker is being heard and displayed, we ask that you remain on mute unless you have sought recognition, and I will call on you, or if you need to seek recognition, please do so. Myself or a staff designee may mute the participant's microphone when they're not under recognition if there's inadvertent background noise. Members who are virtual, though, I want to remind you that you are responsible for muting and unmuting yourselves unless we have a technical issue. If I notice when you're recognized and having a technical issue and you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask the staff to send you a request to unmute yourself. Please accept the request so that you are no longer muted. And finally, House rules would require me to remind you that we have set up an email address in which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing to any of our hearings. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. This morning's subcommittee will receive testimony from the Honorable Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and to help answer any extremely technical questions, we are joined today by Undersecretary Mike McCord, Comptroller. Gentlemen, thank you for participating, and I welcome you to our subcommittee. The Biden administration released its fiscal year 2023 budget request in March. As always, this subcommittee will have an aggressive schedule to review the request, to make adjustments, and pass the bill out of committee in June. Our goal will be to go to the floor with the appropriations bill in July and to get them to the President's desk by October for his signature. We both know that speed is of the essence because both here at home and around the world, democracy and democratic values are under threat. Congress must make every effort to pass these appropriations bills on time. For fiscal year 2023, the President has proposed $762 billion within our subcommittee's jurisdiction. This is a $33 billion or 4.6% increase over what was enacted in fiscal year 2022. Make no mistake, we will ensure that the Department of Defense has the resources it needs to protect our country. But this top line number, when you put in perspective, let's think about it for a minute. In 2015, when we were still fighting in Afghanistan, the department received $5.60 billion. That's an increase of spending over $200 billion in just 8 years. And yes, the world has changed, and it's changed rapidly in recent years. And we've learned a lot. We've learned from the war in Ukraine that it's not only important that we have strong military deterrence, but we also must have a robust diplomatic efforts to rally the world in opposition to authoritarianism. We must both ensure that we have both in order to protect our national security. It is our responsibility as Congress to strike the correct balance between defense, diplomacy, and development. The war in Ukraine has also made it clear that the foundational task of properly maintaining, training, and equipping a modern military is essential to our success in the 21st century conflicts. The poor performance in Russia and their military has highlighted this very fact. Taking care of our personnel, their families, providing our service members with the best training possible, ensuring logistics challenges can be overcome, and given decision makers the best intelligence. These are all vital components of making sure that our military can win in any conflict. Procurement, modernization, of course, are important, but we will always want to have the edge over our enemy. It doesn't matter if we have 355 Navy ships with the most advanced weapons if we cannot perform basic maintenance and keep the ships in service. Investments in personnel and operation and maintenance and health don't always drive the defense budget debates, but last year they made up 63% of our bill. We all know that there's no more critical investment in the life and health and safety of our service members. Members have been particularly alarmed with recent events at the USS George Washington, where there have been several deaths, including investigations into suicide. The Navy has launched its investigation into what led to these terrible tragedies. This subcommittee stands ready to work with you for any additional funding for mental health services and any suicide prevention programs that you should want more resources for. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses how the budget request prioritizes investments in our people, which are the backbone of our force. I want to commend the department for proposing a $3.1 billion in this budget for increasing resiliency at installations, for energy efficiency, for its research and development into clean energy. As the largest consumer of fuel in the federal government, the department needs to do more to reduce its emissions, lower the cost of energy, and to fight climate change. And our subcommittee wants to work with you on these shared goals. And we all know that climate change and addressing it is part of our national security agenda. Finally, several of us have had the opportunity to travel to Eastern Europe in the last month to see firsthand the importance of working with the soldiers and sailors and Marines, airmen and guards who are all doing whatever they can to help Ukraine defend itself and promote security throughout the region. We look forward to hearing how this budget request and the immediate threat of Russian aggression in Europe while making investments in future capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. And as you know, we sent over to the Senate the supplemental support for Ukraine last night. So Secretary Austin, General Milley, Undersecretary McCord, I want to thank you again for your service and the service of your families to our country and for being here ready to answer any questions we might have. But before we hear your testimony, sir, I'd like to recognize our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Calvert, for any opening comments he would have. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McCollum. I want to thank Secretary Austin, General Milley, for being here today to testify the Department of Defense budget request for fiscal year 2023. Though I look forward to hearing about your priorities for the coming fiscal year, I must note my disappointment in the request, both in the amount and substance. As I said last year, I believe it's critical that we fund the DoD at 3 to 5% above inflation to meet our national defense requirements. The 4.6 requested for FY23 would be sufficient, historic levels, but due to this administration's spending, inflation is soaring at rates we have not seen since 1981. Instead of accounting for these economic realities, the DoD wrongfully budgeted for a 2.2% inflation rate in a time where we must increase defense spending to keep pace with peer adversaries. This administration is effectively proposing to cut the Department of Defense. America must continue to enforce the rules-based order that we led in the enduring global security that we involved in. As we have seen in Ukraine, the world looks to the United States to stand by democratic allies around the world. This comes at a cost, but doing so is in our own national security interest. Republicans in the House and the Senate are united, just as we were in fiscal year 22, to ensure that our warfighters have the tools they need to be ready, modernized, and lethal. It's my hope that the majority follows that fiscal year 2022 conference framework that provided sufficient funding to DoD and that we pass our bills on time this year. Along with my disappointment in the top-line funding level, I also have serious concerns about some of the proposals by the administration. First, many of the services are continuing to pursue a divest to invest strategy. In some cases, like the Marine Corps, I think this is appropriate. In others, I fear some proposals are short-sighted and leave glaring capability gaps. We cannot simply hope that the programs will meet the needs of the warfighters. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, non-state actors are continuing to invest in capabilities that threaten our security as well as our allies. I fail to understand how decommissioning 24 Navy ships, divesting hundreds of aircraft, helps us maintain our strategic combat advantage over these threats. Budget prioritization must, of course, occur, but we must be ready for a variety of conflicts to break out in multiple warfighting domains. Though I expect much of the discussion today to be focused on the situation in Ukraine, I do not want us to lose sight on what happened in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Not only did this decision weaken our strategic footprint in the region, it directly led to the deaths of 13 U.S. service members. I look forward to hearing from you about what our enduring requirements in this region are, along with what capability we should be focused on in FY23 appropriation bills. Again, thank you for being here today. Look forward to taking time to question you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. The full committee chairwoman, Ms. Delora, will be joining us later, but now it's my pleasure to recognize the former chair of the subcommittee and now the full ranking member of the committee, Ms. Granger.
Thank you, Chairman McCollum. I appreciate that very much. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us today. The past several months have highlighted how important it is that Congress prioritizes our national security and adequately funds our military. Russia's unprovoked, illegal, and appalling invasion of Ukraine must continue to be met with strong resistance from the United States and our allies. Adversaries like China and Iran and North Korea must know that America will stand firm with its allies and we have the ability to win any fight. While I commend the Department's swift response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, I'm disappointed by the Department's fiscal year 2023 budget request. Inflation continues to increase costs for all sectors, and the defense industry is not immune to its effects, despite increased aggression from our adversaries, and once again, the Biden administration is shortchanging defense. I hope we can reach a bipartisan consensus similar to the one that led to the final passage of the fiscal year 2022 appropriation bills. This includes robust defense spending at a rate much higher than requested by the administration. Congress must ensure that our men and women in uniform have the tools and the resources to meet and defeat our enemies. Now is not the time to underfund the military. And to close, I thank each of you for your service. I look forward to hearing from you today, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Granger. Gentlemen, your full written testimony will be placed in the record. Members have lots of questions, as you can well imagine, so feel free to give a summarized form of your statements. Secretary Austin, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, Ranking Member Granger, and all the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the chance to testify today in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2023. It's great to be here with General Milley, who's been an outstanding partner. I'm also pleased to be joined by our Comptroller, Undersecretary Mike McCord. Madam Chair, we're still focused on three key priorities at the Department of Defense: defending our nation, taking care of our people, and succeeding through teamwork. And our budget request helps us meet each of those priorities. Our budget request seeks more than $56 billion for air power platforms and systems, and more than $40 billion to maintain our dominance at sea, including buying 9 more Battle Force ships, and almost $13 billion to support and modernize our combat-credible land forces. Our budget request also funds the modernization of all 3 legs of the nuclear triad to ensure that we maintain a safe, secure, and effective strategic deterrent. And of course, none of these capabilities matter much without our people and their families. So we're seeking your support for a 4.6% pay raise for our military and civilian personnel and other special pay and benefits. We also plan to invest in outstanding and affordable child care and in the construction of on-base child development centers and in ensuring that all of our families can always put good and healthy food on the table. We're also deeply focused on the terrible problem of suicide in the U.S. military. So we're increasing access to mental health care, expanding telehealth capacities, and fighting the tired old stigmas against seeking help. And with your support, I've just ordered the establishment of an independent review committee to help us grapple with suicide, to better understand it, to prevent it, and treat the unseen wounds that lead to it. At the same time, we're still working hard to implement the recommendations of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault. We know that we have a long way to go to rid ourselves of this scourge, and our budget request seeks nearly $480 million to do just that. This is a leadership issue, and you have my personal commitment to keep leading. You're also seeing how much our leadership matters when it comes to Ukraine. And last month, I convened the first meeting of what's now the Contact Group on Ukrainian Security. It's a group of defense leaders from around the world committed to supporting Ukraine after Russia's unprovoked and unjust invasion. And it's an important new way for nations of goodwill to intensify their efforts to help Ukraine better defend itself, both for today's urgent needs and for the long haul. Now, with the help of Congress, the United States has been able to deliver security assistance to Ukraine with unprecedented speed and resolve. And that's made a huge difference on the ground. And President Zelensky made that clear when I met with him last month in Kyiv, along with Secretary of State Blinken. Since January 2021, the United States has committed approximately $4.5 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, which includes the $150 million authorized by the President last Friday. Our most urgent goal continues to be sending the Ukrainians the capabilities they need most right now, as a war has shifted to the Donbass and to the south. The coming weeks will be critical for Ukraine. Next week, we expect to exhaust the drawdown authority that Congress approved in March. So as you know, the President submitted a supplemental budget request to Congress so that we can continue to meet Ukraine's urgent requirements without interruption. And I deeply appreciate the House's vote yesterday to approve that request with bipartisan support. And I hope that the Senate quickly follows. The supplemental will provide funds for additional drawdown authority. It will also provide more resources for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, for critical investments, and for covering the operational costs of bolstering NATO's eastern flank. I want to thank all of you for your strong leadership toward our shared goal of helping Ukraine defend itself and support NATO. Supporting NATO. Now, let me briefly mention a few other major efforts that the department's focused on. As you know, the department's pacing challenge remains countering aggression from China. So this budget invests some $6 billion in the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. And in keeping with our new national defense strategy, we're going to enhance our force posture, our infrastructure, our presence, and our readiness in the Indo-Pacific, including the missile defense of Guam. At the same time, we must be prepared for threats that pay no heed to borders, from pandemics to climate change. And we must tackle the persistent threats posed by North Korea, Iran, and global terrorist groups. So I'm proud that our budget seeks more than $130 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation. And that's the largest R&D request that this department has ever made. This includes $1 billion for artificial intelligence, $250 million for 5G, nearly $28 billion for space capabilities, and another $11 billion to protect our networks and develop a cyber mission force. Madam Chair, this budget maintains our edge, but it does not take that edge for granted. So I ask this committee to support the President's budget, and with the help of Congress, we will continue to defend this nation, take care of our people, and support our allies and partners. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Milley, the floor is yours.
Chair McCollum and Ranking Member Calvert and Ranking Member Granger, I'm indeed privileged to be here alongside the Secretary of Defense and Secretary McCord to represent the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, Marines, Guardians of the United States Joint Force. Our troops are the best led, best equipped, best trained, most lethal, and most capable military force in the world, largely due to your continued support. Alongside our allies and partners, at any given time, approximately 400,000 of us are currently standing watch in 155 countries and conducting operations every day that keep Americans safe. Currently, we are supporting our European allies and guarding NATO's eastern flank in the face of the unnecessary war of aggression by Russia against the people of Ukraine and the assault on the democratic institutions and the rules-based international order that have prevented great power war for the last 78 years since the end of World War II. We are now facing two global powers, China and Russia, each with significant military capabilities, both who intend to fundamentally change the current rules-based order. We are entering a world that is becoming more unstable, and the potential for significant international conflict between great powers is increasing, not decreasing. The United States military comprises one of the four key components of national power: diplomatic, economic, informational, and military, in order to protect the homeland and sustain a stable and open international system. In coordination with the other elements of power, we constantly develop a wide range of military options for the President as Commander-in-Chief and for this Congress to consider. As the United States military, we are prepared to deter and, if necessary, to fight and win against anyone who seeks to attack the United States, our allies, or our significant and vital national security interests. The Joint Force appreciates the work that our elected representatives do to ensure that we have the resources needed to train, equip, and manage the force in order to be ready. We thank the Congress for increasing last fiscal year's level of military funding, and we look forward to your support for this year's budget. The Joint Force will deliver modernization and readiness for our armed forces and security to the people of the United States at the FY23 budget request of $773 billion. This budget will enable the decisions, the modernization, and the transformation of the Joint Force in order to set and meet the conditions of the operating environment that we are likely to see in 2030 and beyond, the so-called change in the character of war that we have discussed many times in the past. We will work diligently to ensure the resources the American people entrust to us are spent prudently in the best interests of the nation. In alignment with the National Defense Strategy and the forthcoming National Military Strategy, this budget delivers a ready, agile, and capable joint force that will defend the nation while taking care of our people and working with our partners and allies. We are currently witness to the greatest threat to the peace and security of Europe and perhaps the world in my 42, almost 43 years of service in uniform. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is threatening to undermine not only European peace and stability, but global peace and stability, the one that my parents and generations of Americans fought so hard to defend. The islands of the Pacific and the beaches of Normandy bore witness to the incredible tragedy that befalls humanity when nations seek power through military aggression across sovereign borders. Despite this horrific assault on the institutions of freedom, it is heartening to see the world rally and say never again to the specter of war in Europe. Your military stands ready to do whatever is directed in order to maintain the peace and stability not only on the European continent, but a peace that ensures global stability and international order where all nations can prosper in peace. We are also prepared and need to sustain our capabilities anywhere else on the globe, as well as our priority effort in the Asia-Pacific region, measured against our pacing challenge of the People's Republic of China. And in defense of our nation, we must maintain competitive overmatch in all the domains of war: space, cyber, land, sea, and air. The United States of America is at a very critical and historic geostrategic inflection point. We need to pursue a clear-eyed strategy of maintaining the peace through the unambiguous capability of strength relative to China and Russia. This requires that we simultaneously maintain current readiness and modernize for the future. If we do not do that, then we are risking the security of future generations. And I believe this budget is a major step in the right direction. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions and succinct answers. I want to be a good steward of time for my, my colleagues here up at the podium. Yesterday, President Biden referred to combating inflation as his top domestic policy. Would you please share with the committee the FY23 budget request and how it was built and the amount of program and cost growth, and then how you worked inflation into that? So, Secretary Austin, if you'd start out with that, and if you want to turn it over to Mr. McCord at any point, please do so.
Well, thank you, Chair McCollum, and I will provide some comments, and I certainly will invite Secretary McCollum to, Secretary McCord, excuse me, to make some comments as well. We built this budget based upon our National Defense Strategy, which we just released, as you know, in classified form. We were very diligent, careful to make sure that we went after the capabilities that we needed to support that strategy. And I'm confident that, that we were successful in doing that. And this budget provides us significant capability. And again, as we match those capabilities to what's needed to be relevant in the work that we're pursuing in the Indo-Pacific and also in Europe, I think that that again, this is a very healthy budget and provides us significant capability. When we built the budget, we had to snap the chalk line at some point in time, as you always do when you build a budget. And at that point in time, we made some key assumptions, and I'll let Secretary McCord speak to that.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Yes, as the Secretary said, the first line of effort, of course, was building the budget to support the strategy and implement the strategy. But parallel to that, I was conducting a review, my team was, on what inflation was doing in calendar year 21, which was the period we were building the budget. So we came in with an assumption that that the GDP inflation that we used would be about 2. We saw that was increasing. We doubled it basically to 3.9% for 22 as we built that price increase into 23 and going forward. If you look at the last 6 months of data, which we did not have then but have now, that number is now 5.3. So we are a little under, but we, as the Secretary said, we did the best we could with the information we had. We recognize that things have changed a little since then. And as I described in my rollout briefing when the budget came out, we put about $14 billion a year of additional pricing increase into each year of our 5-year plan for goods and services, another $6 billion for higher compensation. So about $20 billion per year from last year's plan to this year's plan just for the pricing increase on top of the strategy-driven specific program choices.
So, thank you for that. So inflation, as I said, the president is focused on combating it, and I know you will work diligently with both sides of the aisle as well as our staff as we move forward if we have any inflation issues that need to be addressed. But thank you for that answer. The run-up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration engaged in an unprecedented campaign to declassify intelligence, one I fully supported, knowing what I was being briefed on and what I thought the American public and the world should know. Could you maybe expand for this committee how important the role of intelligence diplomacy has been in Ukraine and working with our European allies as the Russians prepared its unnecessary aggression against the people of Ukraine? And are there any areas in the defense intelligence enterprise that you would recommend for additional investments or for this committee to focus on?
Well, thank you, Chair McCollum. You make a great point. What we did in terms of sharing intelligence with our allies and partners was very, very helpful to demonstrate that we wanted to be transparent. And this is a tribute, a credit to the president. It was his decision to move forward and make sure that we shared as much information as possible. That created trust amongst our allies in a more meaningful way, and that trust allowed us to create greater unity. And so from the very beginning, you've seen the president, myself, Secretary Blinken work hard to make sure that we united the alliance as much as we could, and we have been united from the very start, and we hope to be that way going forward. But to answer your question, the sharing of intelligence was a key element in getting us to where we are right now.
And then my last question, and I know I'll probably get a brief answer because we're going to be talking to your staffs as we move forward, but there's a lot of focus on the Indo-Pacific, and rightly so. But the Arctic also, with what is happening with climate change, the natural resources that are up there, the shipping, the distance the United States actually is from Russia, the fact that Russia and China at times are working together, and China's considering itself a near-Arctic nation, which as a geography teacher I find a little baffling, but they often say things that baffle me. Could you maybe talk about what the department is doing to coordinate activities in the Arctic, but here again with a lot of our allies, a lot of our NATO allies, and any resources that you would want us to be focused on that are included in this budget?
We are an Arctic nation. This is a region that's very important to us, and you've seen us address the Arctic in our strategy, our national defense strategy that just came out. You've seen us most recently open up a center that's focused on Arctic issues, and we continue the work of making sure that we have that center properly manned and focused on the right issues. We've conducted a number of significant exercises in the Arctic region here recently. As a matter of fact, there's a substantial exercise ongoing up there right now with air exercise, and that's been, we've been doing that throughout. We'll continue that work. We've recently had 2 combatant commanders visit the Arctic simultaneously, and so I think this is a focus area for us. As you pointed out, this is important, and we'll continue to resource it appropriately.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to being a person from the bold north, as many of us on this committee are, not the gentleman next to me from Florida, however, to work with you on this. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Austin, I think we're all in agreement regarding the threats facing our nation. China is using all the instruments of national power to erode America's standing in the world. We received your new national defense strategy and your FY 2023 budget request. I'd like to know a few things. First, how does this budget align with your new strategy? And second, how does this budget specifically deter China and Russia? For example, with no clear shipbuilding plan and only 8 ships, as I read the budget, requested in the budget coupled with the retirement of 24 ships, I have a very big concern that we're not taking the threat of China aggression in the South China Sea seriously, especially when China is building 22 ships this year. We're retiring 24 and only building 8. How does this budget ensure that we're balancing the ability to fight tonight with a much-needed modernization across the armed forces?
Well, thank you, sir. Again, when we built this budget, we built it based upon our new national defense strategy. And there is significant investment in a number of issues, a number of capabilities that are absolutely relevant to the competition with China. As you know, we have to be relevant in all domains, all warfighting domains, air, land, sea, space, and cyber. And in this budget, you see us invest $27 billion in space, and another $11 billion in cyberspace, $24 billion in missile defense and defeat, $7 billion in long-range fires, $4 billion of that is invested in hypersonics. And so we're investing in significant capability with this budget. And there's an additional $6.1 billion invested in our Pacific Defense Initiative. So we believe that again, this is going after the right capabilities to ensure that we remain not only competitive, but we maintain that competitive edge that we spoke of earlier.
Well, obviously, from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of many of us on this side, is obviously all the things that you talked about we're supportive of. But at the same time, numbers do matter. And right now, as you know, the Chinese have, about 360 ships to our 280 ships, and they're building significantly, almost 3 to 1 to our capability. So that's a big concern. One other quick question on the issue of civilian personnel. I know I bring this up to you and others often. I have a historic trend sheet here that I would like to submit to the record. In the year 2000, there were 651,000 DoD civilians and 1,384,000 active duty military. Today, there's 100,000 more civilians, 752,000, actually 753,000 civilian employees to 1,350,000 active duty. So we've dropped active duty by 50,000 and increased civilians by 100,000, and the ratio obviously is out of sync to the historic average. And I think I've mentioned to you, if we went to the Business Council recommendation to bring that back to the historic ratio, we would save $125 billion over 5 years, which we could keep in the department and spend on procurement of building the ships that we need and building the new airframes that we need and assisting the Army and all the rest of the service on the capabilities that they desperately need. So, again, I would take a look at the reforms that are necessary to bring this back into some historic ratio where we spend the money where it needs to be spent. And, Madam Chair, I'd like to submit this, Chair, for the record.
Without objection.
Anything you would like to address on that, Mr. Secretary?
Well, thanks, sir. As I've mentioned to you before when we talked about this, maintaining the right balance, as you pointed out, is a key objective of mine. And we'll stay sighted on this and make sure that we do in fact have the right balance. We've taken on a number of new initiatives. We're doing things in space and cyberspace and other areas that require additional staffing. But to your point, we have to make sure that we keep our staffs lean and that we have what we need and not more than we need. So I'm committed to you to continue to work this.
Ms. DeLauro, or I should say full committee chair DeLauro.
Mr. Laura's fine. You could even call me Rosa. Anyway, thank you very, very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, when we wrote the second supplemental, one area that we focused on was our ability to track weapons that we are sending to Ukraine. The bill requires you, along with Secretary Blinken, to report to Congress on measures taken to account for the defense articles sent to Ukraine, particularly those that require enhanced end-use monitoring. Look forward to your report. Is there anything you can share with us today about actions you are taking? Would having more of a diplomatic presence in Ukraine, even if it were less than before the Russian invasion, help? How is the Department of Defense ensuring that equipment is reaching the right Ukrainian units and used for their intended purposes? The 2022 Omnibus provided an additional $300 million for U.S. allies and partners in Europe, including $180 million for the Baltic Security Initiative, $30 million for Poland, $30 million for Romania, $20 million for Bulgaria, and $40 million for Georgia. How will the department use these resources to shore up their defenses?
Thanks, Chair DeLauro. Accountability is an important issue to all of us. As you know, we don't have people on the ground right now, so it makes it a bit difficult. Mm-hmm. But this is an issue that when I met with President Zelensky and Minister of Defense Reznikov in Kyiv about 2 weeks ago, I emphasized the importance of accountability. And his Chief of Defense was also in that meeting, and how important it is to make sure that they are tracking the disposition of our sensitive equipment that's being deployed. And they assured me that they were focused on this. And I revisited this again with the Minister of Defense a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and when I met with him in Germany, and then as late as yesterday. And in terms of the disposition, the actual disposition of the equipment whether or not it's getting to where the people that need it. This is something that the chairman and I check every time that we talk to our counterparts, and we talk to them weekly. And again, I revisited this issue with Minister Reznikov yesterday, and again, we'll continue to emphasize this very, very important point.
And I'm presuming that we are working with these other countries in essence to bolster their resources as well in terms of what they need. Bulgaria, Romania, Poland.
We continue that work. You're right, Chair.
Thank you. If I can, I just have a quick question. You know, there's a great focus on the total amount of funding for the Department of Defense. I'd like to focus on two other aspects: consistent and timely funding. From 21 to 22, for programs within the subcommittee's jurisdiction, the department received a 4.7% increase. The budget request proposes a nearly identical increase for 2022 to 2023. We have already started the process of having full committee counterparts meet to attempt to come to an agreement on overall spending, which would greatly facilitate the enactment of the 2023 bills. How important are predictability, the steady increases in funding? How helpful would it be for the department for Congress to enact spending bills before October 1st? And can you describe the negative consequences of another CR?
Well, first of all, Chair DeLauro, let me thank you for your continued focus on this issue. You've done a lot of work to help the department in the past, and I appreciate what I anticipate that you'll continue to do in the future. Thanks for everything. This is really important, and if I could ask for anything, it's for both sides to lean into this and get the budget passed as quickly as possible. And I know it's important to everybody, but as you know, without a budget, we can't do new starts. And some of the things that we want to invest in, which will give us that capability that helps us maintain that competitive edge, we're late in some cases getting started. So getting a budget by September would be great. And again, if I could ask for everyone's help on that again, that's one of the most important things that you could do to help us, aside from passing the budget itself.
Thank you very, very much, and thank you for your help the last time. I just might conclude by saying that through the supplementals, both in March and the one we passed last night, we're talking about close to $30 billion for defense. So I think we are keeping our commitment in that effort as we move forward, and so that what we're looking at in terms of the increased percentage in the president's budget, et cetera, should be in line with where we can try to move forward. But thank you very, very much, all of you, for your service and for all of your efforts to keeping our national security secure. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for working it in. I know how busy everybody is.
I'm going to dash next door. So
Next, for questions, we will hear from the full ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Granger.
Thank you. The military services want to retire equipment well before the end of their useful lives. The capabilities lost by retiring these assets will not be replaced until future systems come online. One example of this is the Navy's Littoral Combat Ship. General Milley, please explain how the department determines what amount of risk is acceptable when considering these types of retirements.
The way we evaluate risk is risk to the mission. Primarily, we take inputs from the combatant commanders for that. And secondly, evaluate risk to force. And for that, we're looking at train, man, equip, which is primarily the roles of the service chiefs. Together, those come in to me, and I compile that for the Secretary and provide him a risk assessment. With respect to the Littoral Combat Ship Navy program, Navy Marine program, there's an ongoing study for amphibious warfare and in the Navy for the shipbuilding, as was mentioned by Ranking Member Calvert about shipbuilding. And we base a lot of our analysis on those inputs from the Navy and the Marine Corps.
So if you don't have a replacement for it and you're still considering it, then why would you mothball them, as we call it, at this time?
Well, it comes down to balance in terms of what's affordable and what the Navy can afford and what the Department of Defense can afford. So there's risk calculations on what not to fund and what to fund. And the overall assessment was to go ahead and fund the 8 ships that we're buying and not to continue to fund the LCS for this particular budget.
I have serious concerns about the way that was determined. I have another question. Secretary Austin, the conflict in Ukraine has placed a high demand on our supply of javelins, Stingers, and other U.S. munitions. This demand has highlighted a capacity issue for defense industry. How can we best support a robust and flexible capacity for our defense industry, and how can we ensure that we have stockpiles sufficient to meet demand for critical items needed in Ukraine and for future conflicts?
The stockpiles are something that the chairman and I monitor routinely. Certainly, we have the input from each of the services. In terms of working with industry to get them to open up lines and increase production, as you know, we met with industry early on. They've committed to doing that. You saw the president was just down at one of the javelin, one of the places where we're producing javelins here just recently, and got a thorough lay down. So the defense industry is leaning into this. It'll take a little bit of time to get some of these opened up to the degree that we want them opened up, but that work is ongoing. And I have to admit that the industry is meeting us more than halfway on this issue.
Thank you.
Next, excuse me, next we'll go to Mr. Ruth Ruppensberger, Mr. Womack, Mr. Aguilar, and then Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Ruppensberger, you're recognized.
The first thing I want to acknowledge, Mr. Secretary and General, your competence, your leadership. Throughout the years that I've been here, I've been working mostly national security, and I think you both are excellent leaders, and you're in very difficult times, and I think you know how to build the right team to move forward and what your mission is. So thank you for your service. I'm going to get into more a specific area, Ukraine's cybersecurity posture. Over the last few weeks, we have publicly learned more and more about how our nation's cyberspace operations have both aided allies and partners like Ukraine, and our own understanding of our adversaries' capabilities and techniques in cyberspace. Now, how important is persistent engagement with malign actors in cyberspace, and how do you assess U.S. Cyber Command's capacity to build more partnerships like we have with European nations and other parts of the world?
In terms of the importance, it is absolutely critical, and that's why early on we partnered with Ukrainians and helped them with training and helped them to outline issues and associated with their networks. That's paying dividends for them as we speak. It also allows us to get early warning if we see something developing that could be a threat to our allies or us. And so that's been very helpful to us. In this budget, sir, you've seen that we've invested some over $11 billion in cyber. That helps us to modernize the force, but it also helps to increase the size of the force. And that will help in our efforts to partner with additional nations, not only in Europe, but most importantly in the Indo-Pacific as well. So to answer your question, it's critical. We are building more capacity to be able to do that as we speak.
Another question, how much flexibility do you have in your posture based on the department's fiscal year 2023 budget to account for possible increased risk to national security systems and defense critical infrastructure here in the United States, given the White House's public acknowledgement of evolving intelligence that the Russians are exploring options for cyber attacks?
Again, I think we have We have significant capacity. We need more capacity, and we're investing in that. In terms of threats to the homeland, as you know, sir, DHS is the lead agency for that, but we are doing everything within our power to be ready to assist DHS with anything that they need help with. And so that coordination is ongoing. We've leaned forward on this quite a bit, and I think it's been very helpful. So we'll continue those efforts.
Well, and I know NSA does a lot in this regard. Chris English, who was deputy director, very qualified and competent, is really heading up the domestic side now. And I assume that you all come together as a team to share information to protect us.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's routine coordination. That and you know General Nakasone, he is absolutely focused on being ahead of the need, and so there's a great relationship there.
Yeah, and that is a really good team, in my opinion. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country. I want to follow up on a question that my colleague, Mr. Calvert, had asked about the Indo-Pacific strategy. The budget request seems to have small increases in force rotations, but no new real permanent increases in combat-capable military forces in the region. Instead, seems to be betting on more innovation and soft power in that strategy. In my opinion, the need for military power is not decreased, but we're choosing to try to plug in some gaps with maybe some non-military capabilities. So please, Mr. Secretary, help me understand where I'm wrong on this and where this department is trying to go in meeting that very complicated strategy.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong here, sir. I think what I would like to say is, number one, I think we have a very sound strategy, and you've just seen us roll out that new national defense strategy. It focuses on making sure that we employ capability in all 5 of the warfighting domains: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. And it also focuses on making sure that we leverage the capability resident in our allies and partners. And I think that's really important. And as we continue that work, I think we're seeing some great opportunities. But as we look at our strategy, making sure that we are in fact getting the capabilities of space and cyberspace integrated into our efforts, I think is really, really key. Again, with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, we have invested significantly in making sure that we increase our training rotations in the theater, that we're investing in some infrastructure and doing some other things. So I think it's a sound strategy. I think what we've asked for enables us to accomplish that strategy.
Has the unanticipated extraordinary cost to deal with what is going on in Eastern Europe right now, has that cost impacted what we're needing or what we're trying to do in this budget for our biggest pacing threat, which is China?
I would say no. I think that as we've taken on our efforts to help the Ukrainians, we certainly have invested quite a bit. As you heard me say earlier, sir, $4.5 billion over the last couple of years. But we've also seen investment from our allies and partners. Our major efforts here are, with NATO and with the allies and partners that are in the region, who are also investing in providing equipment and training to the Ukrainians as well. And it's that combination of effort that I think has been very, very meaningful. So to answer your question, we've maintained our pace, our efforts in the Indo-Pacific, all the while we were engaged in our current efforts in Ukraine.
Got a question for General Milley. President's budget requests a cut in strength in the active Army by 12,000 soldiers. I want us to be very careful as a country not to allow the Army to be a bill payer in a lot of areas. It also cut the end strength for both active Air Force and Navy, but I'd like to specifically focus on the cuts to the Army, and that the Army's requested reduction is based on the reassessment of recruitment potential and obtainable goals. Can you speak to the pipeline and the impact it's having on our ability to meet our objectives on the recruiting and retention front?
I can. The overall recruiting has actually gone well for the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps. They're meeting their goals, and Space Force. They're meeting their goals. Army's a little bit behind glide path. Now, high schools haven't graduated yet. They're coming up. So those numbers are leaving out a little bit here in the coming months. But we project that the Army will come up a point or two below what their desired recruiting goals are. Relative to the end strength, what Secretary Wormuth and Chief of Staff McConville are focused on is quality of the force. So they want to make sure that they're bringing in the high-quality individuals into the military. So they determined, in order to do that, they wanted to cut end strength just a little bit. So it's a modest cut. I don't think it'll have a significant negative impact on the overall national security of the United States. Take, for example, what you mentioned about in the Pacific. We've got 350,000+ troops arrayed in the Pacific from the West Coast all the way forward stationed west of the MDL. We've got a very, very large and capable naval force with the PAC fleet. You've got a corps and a couple of divisions, and you've got a tremendous amount of 4th and 5th generation aircraft along with cyber and space capabilities. So relative to the pacing threat, the main effort, if you will, the strategic main effort for the United States military, that is clearly in the Pacific. So even though we are incurring additional capabilities and investments in what we're doing with Ukraine, it's not having a significant negative effect on our ability to keep pace with China. And I think the cuts for the Army, for example, are quite modest relative to the whole.
Thank you, General.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Aguilar, then Mr. Adderholt, and then Mr. Christ. Mr. Aguilar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary and General. Secretary Austin, recently you spoke about the need to track and understand and respond to malign activities in the gray zone, including the information space and the need to invest in irregular warfare capabilities. What is the Ukrainian crisis teaching the nation about the importance of irregular warfare in a peer and near-peer fight?
Again, I think this is a thing that we need to be capable of addressing going forward, and that we account for that in our strategy. We've seen the Russians engage in this type of activity in a consistent fashion throughout, since 2014. We've watched this continue to unfold. So we'll need to make sure that we have the right capabilities and the people with the right skills to be relevant in this kind of activity going forward.
How are we thinking about future policies, existing policies, that will enable us to compete effectively in this climate moving forward?
And our policies, we need to make sure that they support speed of effort, and that we have the authorities necessary to get after the things that again will be effective in this fight. And I think, as with anything, our policies and authorities will evolve as we continue our efforts in this and other places around the globe.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to shift topics and talk about domestic violent extremism and express my support for your continued commitment to address threats of domestic violent extremism in the military. You previously spoke with us and said that 99.9% of troops serve with dignity and honor, but a small number can have an outsized impact on a great organization. And you've talked about including reworking existing screening procedures for recruits, partnering with other federal agencies, and revamping insider training programs. And General Milley, you've spoken about these as well, these programs. Secretary, can you talk about how the fiscal year 23 budget request continues support for these efforts?
It certainly does allow us to continue to support the policies and procedures that we put into place. And again, I would echo what you said earlier. My firm belief has been and remains that 99.9% of our troops are focused on the right things and are doing the right things each and every day. We certainly, as you pointed out, need to do a good job, a better job of screening people as they come into the military, and also as they're in the military, making sure that they remain focused on supporting those values that they've sworn an oath to uphold. But we have in this budget, we've asked for an ample amount of funds to support our efforts that you asked about.
General, domestic violent extremism, and you've spoken with this committee about this in the past, and I appreciate your comments. What more can we do? How should we be thinking through future insider threats and some of the policies that might need to be addressed and changed?
Just a couple of things. First of all, I think the size, scale, and scope of the problem is very, very small inside the military. And as the Secretary just said, 99.9% of those in uniform are serving their country faithfully, and they're faithful adherence to their oath to the Constitution of the United States. Having said that, small numbers can make a big difference if they choose to use violence in some manner, shape, or form. So it all comes down to good order and discipline of the force, and that is the role of the chain of command. So the best thing we can do is to reinforce the authorities of the chain of command, educate the chain of command to signs and indicators of radical extremism on one bent or another, and then to take appropriate action if they identify someone who displays those sorts of behaviors. We're into behavior, not thought. That's a very, very important distinction. We're not out to govern people's thoughts, but behavior is a different matter. And that's what that's what the Uniform Code of Military Justice is all about, and that's one of the key roles of a chain of command.
I appreciate the leadership that both of you have shown in this regard, and thank you for continuing to work with this committee and others to address these issues moving forward. And like you both said, an incredibly small number, but we want to make sure that they were doing everything we can to protect the workforce, protect the country, and ensure the proper leadership. So thank you both so much. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Adderholt, please.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, General Milley, Undersecretary McCord, thank you all three for being here today. My first question deals with some mineral issues that we've potentially could have, problems we could have in this country. Of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated how Europe has been affected by reliance on Russia for resources like oil and gas. But a recent U.S. Geological Survey report illustrated that the United States is similarly reliant on Russia and China for some of our most critical mineral needs. And I, too, have concerns about the defense industrial base being too reliant on countries that probably doesn't have our best interest at heart. And I think certainly we all should agree that the time to address this and look at this now is as opposed to waiting until a crisis occurs. I plan to work with my colleagues to try to address this problem. My question to you, let me just address this to you, Secretary Austin. How concerned are you about the risk posed to the defense industrial base by continued reliance on strategic adversaries for our critical minerals? And what else can we do to try to address this issue?
You raise a very good point, sir. This is an issue that's very important to us. It's also important to our country. It's important to our president. As you've seen, the president adopt an initiative that causes us all to focus more on our supply chain vulnerability. DOD certainly has a key part of that. We're concerned about making sure that we have the right capabilities with respect to microelectronics, casting and forging, battery and energy storage, critical materials, as you pointed out. Want to make sure that we have the right amounts of stockpiles to be able to support our efforts. So DOD is focused on this as a part of the overall government's effort. But to your point, this is very, very important to us.
So this is something that you do have some great concerns about at this point?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
General Milley, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I concur 100%. concern about us being overly reliant on raw materials, critical minerals, as you say, from any country that's an adversary to the United States. To the extent that's humanly possible, that stuff should be produced in the United States and under our control.
Let me just also mention something that's already been asked about, but we've already talked about how we have done so much to send vital equipment to Ukraine, and of course, we can always debate whether we've sent enough and that, but there's no doubt that the success they've had has been because of our helping in the process. But to follow up on a question that Ranking Member Granger, much of the equipment that has come out of our own defense stockpiles, and I'm glad that Congress has already appropriated $3.5 billion to DoD to backfill the transferred equipment. And of course, last night the House passed legislation for additional support for Ukraine. It is clear that DOT's equipment stocks could prove vital if a similar situation will arise in the Pacific and Taiwan. I'd like to get your thoughts on whether the Department of Defense level of stockpiled equipment and munitions should be grown to the levels larger than they were prior to Russia's invasion.
Thanks, sir. And again, thanks for your support in getting the legislation through yesterday. That's very helpful to us. As you know, we base our decisions on the size of the stockpile on our requirements. And, as we look around at our global requirements to support our plans, we believe that the stockpiles are adequate. And if we believe that we need to grow them based upon changing situations or changes in our plans, then certainly we'll do that. We'll take that on and make sure that we advise the president that that's a necessity. But right now, again, our requirements put us in a place where we have the stockages that we have, and we think it's about right.
So do you think if we increased our stockpiles, it would deter aggression by China toward Taiwan?
Our adversaries don't really know what we have in our stockpiles, nor should they. And so I'm not sure that would act as in itself as a deterrent. They'll judge. They'll base their judgment on our actions and our demonstrated commitment more so than what they believe our stockpiles to be.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adholt. Mr. Christ, then Mr. Carter, and then Ms. Kilpatrick. Mr. Christ, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to express my gratitude to you, Mr. Secretary, and General, to you as well. As Member Ruppensberger mentioned in his beginning comments, the service you provided to our country has been extraordinary, and God bless you for your dedication to protecting America and freedom. So I was curious, I read about the hypersonics that were used against Odessa. Obviously, that's very disconcerting, and I wondered if you had any commentary if we should expect more of that, or what your view of it is. Either one of you. Please.
A couple of comments. One is the Russians have used several hypersonic missiles. Obviously, the distinguishing factor of a hypersonic missile is the speed at which it travels. And we have analyzed each of these shots that they've taken. And I'd like to go into a classified session and discuss any of the specific details. But other than the speed of the weapon, in terms of its effect on a given target, we are not seeing really significant or game-changing effects to date with the delivery of the small number of hypersonics that the Russians have used. But I can elaborate further in a classified session if you'd like.
Sure, I appreciate that. Mr. Secretary, you have any comment on that?
No, I absolutely agree with the chairman. They've used a number of them. Ukrainians are still fighting, and I'll leave it at that.
Very well. Is this the first time that we know that they have decided to utilize hypersonics in this war?
This, to my knowledge, is the first time of use of hypersonic munitions in a combat situation.
Ever?
As far as I know, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hypersonic weapon.
Yes, sir. No, I understand.
But the Russians have used them several times in this conflict. And again, not a major game changer to this point. So.
Great. I know you don't have a crystal ball, and it's hard to read Putin's mind, I'm sure. But given the fact that he's utilizing these weapons now, these missiles, do you think that exacerbates the potential for nuclear or not? Or can you tell?
It's very difficult to predict, you know, what or to say what Mr. Putin is thinking. But I would not say that because he's used a hypersonic weapon that's going to cause him to be willing to elevate to use a nuclear weapon. You know, again, he used hypersonic weapons weeks ago. And I think he's trying to create a specific effect with the use of that weapon. And as the chairman has pointed out, it moves at a speed makes it very difficult to interdict. But it hasn't been a game changer.
Pardon me.
He has options. You know, he can, you know, I mean, he can launch a cyber attack. He can employ chemical weapons, those kinds of things that we're all on the lookout for. To see if, you know, he makes those kinds of decisions. But I don't think that this necessarily takes him to the use of a nuclear weapon.
So we voted last night, the House, for $40 billion to help Ukraine. Hopefully the Senate will do that soon. Are we doing enough to keep Ukraine free and protect our ally as much as we should be?
We're doing a lot. And, you know, our allies are doing a lot, and we're going to continue to do everything that we can for as long as we can to help them defend their sovereign space. And so I think the Ukrainians are very grateful for what we're doing for them. It has made a significant difference in their ability to blunt the advance of a superior Russian force. And so, again, their needs will change as this war evolves. At the beginning of the fight, sir, you remember we were focused a lot on providing anti-armor and anti-aircraft weaponry. That really put them in a good place. It helped to help them win the Battle of Kyiv in the north. But as the fight has shifted to the south and to the east, we now see that they have more of a need for long-range artillery, tanks, and armored vehicles, and those sorts of things. And in working with our allies, we're talking to the Ukrainians routinely, and we're trying to provide them exactly what they think they need in the fight.
Great. Well, thank you both again very much for what you're doing and protecting this democracy and this great ally of the U.S. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Carter, then Ms. Kilpatrick, and then Mr. Diaz-Balart, you'll be joining us by video. Mr. Carter.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with a group of people in my district last week. You know, I've got Fort-Hood in my district. You all know that. I'm very, very proud of our men and women that serve in uniform, and I commend you for trying to give them the very best. But we also, as we take care of our warfighters, have to remember the burdens that things in the real world have on that is the economy, has on the families of these warfighters. And right now, what's going on in our part of Texas is our mobile population in America. Americans are migrating to Texas in gigantic numbers, carrying large amounts of money from real estate sales they made in other states that they left. And so not only are they driving up the cost of housing ridiculously high, a house worth $350,000 real worth is selling for $1 million, and so forth. Therefore, even the smaller homes that might be available for servicemen and women off post being driven up to $700,000 to $900,000. And then, with the benefit of a VA loan, they can compete in that market. The sellers don't want VA loans because the other guys are offering cash. That drives all of our military families into the rental market. The rental market is growing at the same rate. So something that 6 months ago was $250 a month, $2,000 a month, is now $4,500 a month. And something that was like $1,000 a month is now $2,500 a month. Now, I realize you're giving them a raise, and I'm really happy about that. Have you considered increasing BAH levels to meet this type of inflationary challenge that we're seeing around our posts, not just in Texas, in many other parts of the country? I'd like to hear your comments, Mr. Secretary, and also General Milley.
Thanks, sir, and thanks for your tremendous support of our troops and families in the Fort Hood area. That's a pretty important part of our overall structure in the military here, big installation. This is a very important issue to me, that the health and well-being of our family members and our troops. You saw us take some action last year or this year to increase BAH in certain areas that were challenged by the forces that you just mentioned. What we're asking for in this budget is help to do more of the same going forward. I think this is really, really important, that the strain caused by rising rent cost and a number of other things are really kind of creating some adverse effects for our lower ranking enlisted, and we remain cited on this. So we're asking for that, some help with that in this budget. We're also asking for $2 billion to support the construction of family housing, military family housing, and the improvement of military family housing as well. So thanks for your support thus far, and I believe this is really, really important. And so we're asking for more help so we can do more of the same in the future.
And I would echo everything the Secretary said, Congressman. I've known you for a long time and have many fond memories of Fort Hood myself. And I heard Congressman Calvert say most of those people are coming from California. So I'd question whether or not Texas made the right choice there. But having said that, that was meant to be funny. Look, soldiers don't ask for much. They want good housing, good health care, good education, and a safe environment for their family. And I believe that, I know that the Secretary of Defense has the entire department focused on it. And I will personally take a hard look at the BAH numbers to see if it's appropriate to make further recommendations on any further increases in terms of housing allowances specific to the Fort Hood area or other areas that are experiencing that.
The gentleman, you'll enjoy my constituents. They're fine people.
I hope so.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question, but I know I've run out of time.
We'll make sure it gets submitted for the record. Thank you, and as you know, there's a freeway that connects Texas and Minnesota, and we have better fishing. So, Ms. Kirkpatrick, we're going to go to you. Mr. Diaz-Balart, if you wouldn't mind getting ready to turn on your video. Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question has to do with climate change. Mr. Secretary, I'm pleased to see the concerted effort in the budget addressing climate change. The Department of Defense has recognized for a while that a changing climate will have significant economic impacts across the globe, lead to food insecurity issues, and potential shifts in regional balances. The Department of Defense is proposing to invest $3.1 billion in this budget for increased generators, storage, and resiliency at military installations, which is a top priority for Fort Huachuca and Davis Monthan Air Force Base in my district. This funding would also go toward improved energy efficiency and logistics and research in reducing energy demand, improved storage, and other energy supplies. Secretary Austin, what are your goals as you direct the department's efforts to meet the climate challenge?
Well, thank you, and I think you nailed it right away when you mentioned that this does affect not only our installations, as we look at our installations and in the coastal regions with the effects of rising water levels, the effects of severe weather, as we have had to deploy troops with a greater frequency to address the aftermath of severe storms. We're deploying troops to fight fires. But to the point that you made earlier, in the regions that we operate in, we're seeing climate change cause migration in some cases, and increased competition for water. So DoD is the largest consumer of energy in the government. Our goal is to make sure that we reduce our carbon footprint by reverting to on our installations using more electric vehicles. I've challenged our installation commanders to find ways to be more efficient in their energy usage. And so we have a number of ongoing projects and efforts to reduce that carbon footprint and be better stewards of our resources here. But again, to the point that you've made, we're asking for $3.1 billion in this budget to help with our efforts in addressing installation resiliency and energy storage.
Thank you. My second question is for General Milley. It has to do with military medical reforms. The military health system is undergoing its most significant transformation in decades. Medical reforms have included a transition of military treatment facilities from control of the services to the Department of Health agencies, and reducing military medical manpower in support of the services lethality priorities. General Milley, are you concerned about the direction of military medical manpower? Are efforts being coordinated across the military services and with the joint staff? And what are the concerns with the medical manpower reductions the services are anticipating?
Thanks for the question. The key issue here is the readiness of the force and the medical readiness of the force. And do we have enough doctors, nurses, and medics or corpsmen in the fielded force to handle combat conditions? And are there enough doctors and nurses available to man combat support hospitals and other field hospitals that are necessary in combat? And candidly, I do have concerns about that. It's a very challenging subset of our overall military personnel challenges, but that one in particular causes great attention because in time of war, as we all know, there'll be significant casualties. In peacetime, you're manning these treatment facilities, these hospitals and clinics, but in wartime, they're going to go forward, and that is where the readiness issues will show up. Right now, we're okay on a day-to-day basis, but I do have concerns that if we did have a significant conflict in terms of our medical personnel and our ability to deploy.
Madam Chair, I have another question, but I'm just about out of time, so I'll submit that for the record, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick, and we're going to be having a military health hearing where we'll get in more depth than that. Mr. Diaz-Balart is submitting questions for the record. He had to leave, so we're going to turn to Mr. Rogers and then excuse me, Ms. Bustos. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Secretary, Undersecretary.
Mr. Rogers. Oh, it's on. It's on.
Can you hear? And General, welcome and thank you for your lifetimes of service to the country. It's appreciated by millions of Americans. Let me bring up a topic that is tough to deal with, and that's escalation, or the possibilities of escalation in Ukraine. I know it's our policy to not be directly involved, and you've maintained that distance. However, the Russians have no compunction about the morals or fair play or rules of war, if you will, and are demonstrating that daily. Suppose, for a moment, that the Russians decide to go after the missile sites in Poland or in the region of any sort. What do we do? What are the rules of the game that we're into here in this battle?
Well, thanks, sir. And to your point, it's always dangerous to go down the road of hypotheticals, but this is an issue that's very, very important. If Russia decides to attack any nation that's a NATO member, then that's a game changer. Then, with respect to the Article 5 commitments, certainly NATO would most likely respond as a coalition in some shape, form, or fashion. And this is a thing that NATO has looked at what it takes to defend NATO countries. It's a thing that's important to us as well. But as you look at Putin's calculus, my view, and I'm sure the chairman has his own view, but my view is that Russia doesn't want to take on the NATO alliance. He's got a number of troops arrayed in the region right now on the Ukrainian border, and he had some in Belarus and still has some there. But there are 1.9 million forces in NATO. NATO has the most advanced capabilities of any alliance in the world in terms of aircraft, ships, types of weaponry that the ground forces use. So this is a fight that he really doesn't want to have, and that would very quickly escalate into another type of competition that no one wants to see.
General?
I would just say, Congressman Rogers, that we monitor this literally every day. It's one of the most significant things we're doing is monitoring the potential risk of escalation in any domain and by geography, by type weapon, et cetera. And it's something that the Secretary has us laser focused on, the President has us laser focused on, and the National Security Establishment is monitoring it very, very closely. We can give you more thorough briefings in a classified session. You asked the question about what we would do. Of course, that's speculative, but there are conditions, there are contingency plans, there are things that we have looked at and will continue to look at, and we monitor it every single day very, very closely.
Are we prepared to respond in some fashion?
I would say that it depends on the the situation, type weapon, nature of escalation, where was it Article 5, was it not? There's a laundry list of questions, and depends on what the answers to those questions are. But in the short answer is yes, of course we are. Militarily, we are very, very capable of responding to any form or fashion of escalation if directed by the President.
And sir, you've heard the President say that we will defend every inch of NATO. And you saw that resolve demonstrated shortly after Putin launched his invasion into Ukraine. We deployed forces to reassure our allies in the Baltic states and on the Eastern Front of NATO. And the President's been very clear about his resolve throughout this. He is committed to defending every inch of NATO.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I'm going to read the next four speakers. However, I will recognize Mr. Cole should he walk in immediately after Ms. Bustos. He is ranking member on an NIH hearing that's taking place across the hall. With that, it'll be Ms. Bustos, Ms. Capter, Mr. Ryan, and Mr. Kilmer. Ms. Bustos, you're now recognized.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. And thanks to our distinguished panel. Appreciate your service to our country. The congressional district that I represent is in the entire northwest corner of the state of Illinois, includes the Rock Island Arsenal. And so I'd like to ask a question around that. We talk a lot about ships and planes and space capabilities when we look at our national defense. But the majority of the sustainment burden for a prolonged conflict is going to rest with the Army, specifically the Sustainment Command. And obviously that is part of the arsenal, and that leads to my question. If you look at history, we know the pivotal role that the Army played in our victories in the Pacific during World War II. So wondering about how we prioritize and account for this in the Army's budget and planning if we assume significantly larger investments in the Departments of Air Force and Navy. And maybe we'll start with you, General Austin, if you could address that, please.
Of course, we start with the strategy, as we've said earlier, and then we make our investments based upon what it takes to support that strategy. And you are correct. The Army has played a critical role in the past. It is playing a critical role as we speak, and it will always play a critical role. If you look at what the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of the Army is what they're trying to do in terms of making sure that they can meet their requirements and also modernize the force going forward. They're basing their requests for resources on that. And we think, as you've heard me say earlier, there's $13 billion or so focused on in this budget, focused on making sure that we can maintain a combat credible land force for both the Army and the Marines. And I really like what we see both the Army and the Marines doing in terms of their investment in modernization and their focus on making sure that they're relevant in any competition, especially any anticipated competition in the Indo-Pacific.
General Milley, anything to add to that?
The Army, relative to the Pacific and relative to some sort of scenario against the People's Republic of China, it is our estimation that the weight of effort would likely be air and sea, maritime and air forces. But having said that, the Marines and the Army will play a very, very critical role in any of those scenarios, as they did, as you mentioned, in World War II. Even though that was a maritime theater, there was a tremendous amount of island landings and seizures and so on and so forth. So it is not a singular service. It is always a joint force executing combined arms operations in all the domains of war to achieve integrated deterrence before war or to achieve victory in the conduct of war. The Army plays a very critical role there. So some of the things the Army is doing in this budget and in their modernization programs, long-range precision fires, for example, is really critical to any type of conflict in the Pacific. Another one is the transformation of a bunch of their formations into multi-domain task forces, as another example. They are making some fundamental changes in the development of rotary wing aircraft and future vertical lift. There's a whole series of modernization initiatives as we move into the future, into the change in the character of war, into the future operating environment the Army is doing to transform itself so that they can achieve an effect, not only in the Pacific, but anywhere else in the world.
The modernization efforts are really exciting. I co-chair the Army Depot and Arsenal Caucus. Right. I co-chair that, and we were briefed recently on the modernization efforts, and I'm going to get into that a little bit as well. So also at the Rock Island Arsenal, we're designated as the Army's Advanced Manufacturing Center of Excellence. We're very proud of that, and obviously supporting the Army's overall goal of modernization. So I'd like to get your thoughts on the importance of advanced and additive manufacturing to the Defense Department. That is what is being centralized through the arsenal. General?
Thanks, and thanks for your support throughout. But this is a very important capability. If you look at additive manufacturing, it enables us to produce some exquisite types of components, and we can do that forward and save time and stress on our logistical chains, and so I think it's a great capability. And as this continues to develop, I'm pretty excited about the possibilities. But we know that a lot of that is playing out in your home state, and we appreciate the support that you provided them. So.
13 seconds left. General Milley, anything to add to that?
It's a great capability, and we appreciate what's happening at Rock Island for the entire force.
You guys come over and see us, okay?
Absolutely.
You're invited. Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cole, unfortunately, will not be joining us, so it'll be Ms. Capter, Mr. Ryan, Mr. Kilmer, and then Mr. Calvert, and I will wrap up the hearing. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Austin, General Milley, thank you for your exemplary lifetime of service to the people of our country. What a great example each of you are to the young people aspiring in our country. I'm going to make just a couple little short statements, and then I will focus on naval readiness. But I come from the 4th Seacoast, and as the Department of Defense considers deploying various assets, and I just ask you to please don't forget the defense industrial base of the country, which Congresswoman Bustos referenced right now, both in terms of manufacturing capacity as well as energy. We are often overlooked as the 4th Seacoast, as we look at just the Washington, D.C. area, for example. And so I just wanted to point you to that 4th Seacoast. Secondly, in terms of issues, I'm very concerned about our military and the nutritional value of food served to our military personnel, having just come back from Grafenwöhr and Rzeszów in Poland. And I would like you to find someone in the department that could come to my office and we could discuss this. I would be very grateful for that. And then secondly, the question of Russian vulnerabilities in terms of Ukraine right now. I don't want to talk about it here, but I hope someone somewhere in the defense establishment would be able to brief us on that, as well as the global energy supply issue and how that relates to what is happening on that continent far from here. Thirdly, I just wanted to mention the issue of behavioral health. And I was down at Southcom with some of our members years ago, and shortly thereafter, though the topic of the meeting was behavioral health, extremely high-ranking individual took his life in Bahrain, some of them I had met down there. And so I can put this on the record as a member of the Mental Health Caucus here in Congress. We are 100,000 neuropsychiatrists short as a country. We are 400,000 behavioral nurses short. So how do we attempt to help the people of our country, whether they are principals in schools or commanders of units in the military, when we don't have the personnel to do it? I would urge you to consider the Uniformed Services University of Health Services as a portal where we could create a program that would draw people in. They're not going into this field because they earn more operating on people's knees than they do taking care of their neuropsychiatric conditions. But maybe we could have a combined military-civilian program that would draw people into this so we could help the people of our country. I just want to put that down. Finally, in terms of naval readiness, I have to say I'm terribly concerned about what happened on the George Washington and on the WASP. I know that one of my other subcommittees, we deal with nuclear weapons, and the time it's taking both to retool the weapons as well as repair ships is creating a dispirited situation for some of our naval personnel, for example, who thought a ship would be maybe repaired by, if it's sitting in Newport News, a year ago or a year and a half ago. For hundreds of those sailors, they have no access to housing or a car, and they're stuck on the ship. This is really demoralizing. And I am troubled by the defense submission on the Navy because I see it getting worse. And so I just wanted to point a flashlight at this part of the budget and say, we got to do something. And I'm not sure what it is, but we can't keep trying to do everything and not doing it well and not taking care of those who are in service to our country right now and the equipment that we are using, and to try to get a faster pace to repair. The George Washington's going to be up there in dry dock for another year. It was supposed to be finished in 2022. So I'm really worried about this issue, and I'm hoping at another briefing or somehow we can get greater clarity on where we're headed on this. So if you have any comments about naval readiness and the backlog of repair, its impact on morale, and where we head, your budget makes me even more nervous.
Mr. Secretary, I'll yield Ms. Capter an additional minute so that you can start answering that question, and the rest we'll take for the record. Mr. Secretary.
Okay. Well, certainly I share your concern on the issue of mental health and our access to resources. And that's why we're asking you for, in this budget, additional resources to help us provide greater access to our troops, which includes telehealth care opportunities as well. But this is a really, really important issue. I certainly will take on your recommendation to take a look at our uniformed services piece here and what can be done there. So we'll have somebody come talk to you on the other issues that you raised as well. And if you want to talk on global energy supplies, we'll liaise with with DOE as well to make sure that they know you have an interest here. The repair of a nuclear carrier is very, very sophisticated, and especially that level of repair that it's ongoing. The pressure that COVID has put on all of our enterprise is significant, but that work has continued. Certainly not at the pace that we'd like to see it continue. That there are 2 investigations ongoing by the Navy on the George Washington issue, and I look forward to seeing the results of those investigations. And I think the Secretary of the Navy is headed down to visit with the George Washington chain of command here on the 17th, and should have greater insights to provide from that visit as well. There are choices that have been made or will be made in the future in terms of how you billet sailors when that repair is ongoing. Whether or not we made the right choices is left to be seen. Certainly there's a problem there. We got to understand what that problem was a bit more, and then we have to figure out what to do to ensure that we don't have these kinds of problems in the future. Again, I don't think it was anticipated. Certainly was not anticipated that the ship would be in a repair cycle this long. But nonetheless, I expect the leadership to make the right decisions, and I look forward to seeing what the investigations are going to show us here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Ryan, then Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me extend my thanks as well. I can't imagine how many sleepless nights you've had over the past few months, and we appreciate it. You're the defenders of freedom in this country, and we're here to try to help and support the best we can. I'm going to kind of go through a few things, comments before I have my question. First, let me just say my own personal opinion. We know this ultimately is going to be the decision of Ukraine and their leadership, but I don't think that the Russians should be allowed to have an inch of territory in that country. I just don't think we can reward this kind of behavior. And I know it's clearly more complicated than that, but I think it's important that you know where we stand. To get to some of the issues Ms. Capter brought up around the mental health. Having worked on these issues for a long time, and Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the suicide issue, which is pervasive across our society now. One of the recommendations I would give is, and we've been trying to work on this, how do you evaluate people who are coming into the military? One of the more recent analyses of this issue is around adverse childhood experiences, where people coming into the military are bringing trauma from their childhood. Could be multiple adverse childhood experiences, but in each one of these experiences, it increases your rates of depression, increases your rates of mental health issues, increases your rates of suicide. So I think if you're going to go at this thing, really trying to get some knowledge about the person before they even step foot in the military, and that'll help, I think, begin to try to address some of those issues. I also want to mention having more of a whole-of-government approach. You look at the problems that we have now in Eastern Europe. A lot of this is because of the energy issue and the over-reliance on Russia for oil and gas. And I think a whole-of-government approach. We have gas in Eastern Ohio, Western PA, Utica Shale, Marcellus Shale. How do we build the infrastructure to get this gas, liquid natural gas or whatever it is, out of Eastern Ohio to Eastern Europe? And having obviously not necessarily a short-term solution, but a mid to long-term solution to help our allies in Europe be more reliant on American energy than on Vladimir Putin, which could, I think, knock the legs out from under him. Lastly, and Ms. Capter brought this up too, and she mentioned it around the issue of food. And, it may seem like an ancillary issue in the military, but we've seen from recent studies, multiple studies showing increased rates of obesity, increased rates of diabetes in the military. Now, a few years ago, I sat on the VA committee, right? So we're seeing, like, what are we feeding our troops when they're active? And now we have obesity and diabetes when they go to the VA, which is driving up costs. And I've been working on this issue for a couple years, and we've had the Army make promises about a campus dining pilot, the Air Force Academy, which in good faith they got shut down because of the pandemic. But the superintendent there promised to resume the program. Air Force promised to expand their Food 2.0 modernization to Food 3.0. None of these services mentioned fulfilled their assurances. Navy and Marine Corps did not break any promises because they haven't made any promises. But to me, when you see the recently published report on the military food system, the GEO found that each service's abysmally managed its food systems. And I just think this is something that it's so complicated. My staff brought me a flow chart of how the food system works in the military. It's insane. I mean, there's so many. It's dry. There's no flow. And I just want to be very clear. This is not a food. This is a food management and operations problem. This isn't a nutrition problem. Everybody knows what we should be eating. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge. So in 22, Mr. Secretary, we passed legislation recommending the formation of a food transformation cell, within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And if you could just tell us, what the status is of that cell, and how you can assure us that as we move towards food transformation, there's not going to be more broken promises. I think this is a very important issue for us to save money that we can then put into, a lot of these other programs.
Mr. Secretary, once again, I'll give you a few extra moments here to answer the question.
Thank the chair for her generosity.
Well, thanks, sir. First of all, let me thank you for your interest in this and the work that you've done in the past. And I would like to say that I share your concerns on the importance of this. And I think that the Food Transformation Cell will provide significant benefit in terms of assisting us in coordinating our efforts here. That cell is going to be stood up in September, and then in October we'll submit a report to you on how we stood it up and the progress that's been made to date. So it's a work in progress, but September is the date when that cell will start.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being with us and for your service to our country. Last year, when you were in front of this subcommittee, I asked about the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, the SIOP, which is a 20-year, $21 billion investment in modernizing and optimizing our shipyards. I was pleased to hear both of you say very positive things about that, about the importance of that in terms of the capacity of the Navy to meet its mission. And just understanding how critical that was, and I want to thank you for that, not only for your support of SIOP, but for our public shipyards too. Having said that, I am a bit worried that the program's falling behind in terms of both cost and time. Not to put too fine a point on it, but this really matters. We don't have a shipyard on the West Coast that can handle a Ford-class carrier, and so time is of the essence, and would gleefully invite you to come visit Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in our neck of the woods. The SIOP relies on area development plans to inform the optimization program portions of the SIOP and provide accurate schedule and cost estimates. Those were originally scheduled to be completed at the end of this fiscal year. It looks like that's probably going to slip to the end of next fiscal year, or even later. The Navy also promised to provide a SIOP strategic framework to coincide with the release of the President's budget, but Congress still hasn't received that plan. That guidance aligns all the SIOP activities and provides the overarching framework to implement the SIOP as it moves from the planning into the execution phase. So I'm just concerned that delays both to the area development plans and to the SIOP strategic framework could postpone implementation of some investments that really need to happen for the Navy to meet its mission. So I guess I want to hear from you sort of what the plan is for just making sure that this program stays on track, and what your office is planning in that regard.
Thanks, sir. Again, thanks for your support and your focus on this. It is truly important in terms of making sure that we maintain a world-class capability that we've had and will continue to have with our United States Navy. We invested in this last year. We're asking you for $1.7 billion to put towards this work going forward. That's an historic amount. It's twice the amount that we invested in last year. It certainly helps to get a budget passed on time so that we can make sure that we're implementing our plans on time. And clearly, I believe that going forward, without the impacts of COVID and some other things, that we'll be able to come closer to meeting our goals and objectives. But again, we're not where we want to be. This is important to the Navy, and again, we'll make sure that the Navy's doing everything it can to maintain pace, and we're going to have to pick up the pace here. So,
do you envision a future in which we have to, or you have to set specific targets and metrics and timelines and milestones to just ensure that the Navy's keep it on track?
Navy has those, but certainly making sure that they execute in accordance with the plan is important. And if those goals and objectives are insufficient, then we'll revisit that.
Let me ask, with the time I have left, I know unmanned vehicles are a key part of the cutting edge technologies that DoD is using now and in the future to combat threats from Russia and China and elsewhere. The Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan calls for an increase in unmanned assets. That plan proposed to grow the fleet of unmanned subsurface vehicles from 0 in the current inventory to potentially 50 by fiscal year 2045. Growth in these technologies will lean on installations, including Keyport in my neck of the woods, which is one of the leaders in UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles. As the Navy begins to acquire more unmanned vehicles, how can Congress ensure the Navy is ready to operate this technology alongside manned vehicles?
Well, we're still learning a lot. I point to some of the work that the Fifth Fleet Commander is doing out in the Middle East. This is tremendous capability that we've just begun to scratch the surface on. In terms of what it's going to take to fully develop this, there are a bunch of unknowns now. But it's, I believe that this is a capability that we need to go after faster, further, and so I'll work with the CNO and the SecNav to ensure that they're identifying what their needs are going forward, and that this capability is fully integrated into our manned surface and underwater capabilities as well. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Calvert, any closing remarks?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to submit a number of questions for the record and regarding innovation, hypersonics, Taiwan, fuel costs, a whole bunch of things that we didn't have time to cover today. But General Milley, we had discussed this the other day, and after our hasty exit from Afghanistan, I'm concerned about taking our eye off that region. Obviously, it's still a problem. And as you know, 3 of the 13 service members killed in Afghanistan were either in or near my district in California. Lance Corporal Kareem Nakui, Corporal Hunter Lopez, and Lance Corporal Dylan Marola. The families of the fallen of these folks, these heroes, want obviously justice and accountability. We can discuss this more in a classified setting, but as you know, we're doing what you're doing to find and prosecute these terrorists that conducted that suicide attack at Abbey Gate is extremely important. Not just to the families, but to the morale of the United States Marine Corps that obviously went there and did their duty. Also, I'm concerned about the limitations presented over the horizon counterterrorism capability that potentially will allow ISIS-K and al-Qaeda to regroup. I don't think we should take our eye off the ball on that. And as much as you can say in this setting to ensure that Afghan never becomes a haven for terrorists, again, I like to hear that. And what kind of capability have we lost to conduct counterterrorism missions in the future?
Well, first, Congressman, let me say how deeply I feel personally, and I know the Secretary does as well, and all of the senior leaders in uniform feel about the loss of any of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and particularly those 13 that were killed at Abbey Gate. We feel that personally, and none more personally than the families of the fallen. So we owe them not only a great deal of gratitude, but we owe them accountability for those that killed their loved one. We know that, and we have not forgotten, and we will not forget, not until justice is served. With respect to over-the-horizon capability, I'd like to go into some detail in a classified session, but you and the American people should know that we remain committed as a military to the very first mission statement that we got in Afghanistan, which was to ensure that Afghanistan never again becomes a platform from which terrorists will strike the continental United States. They haven't done that since 9/11, and we are committed to making sure that never happens again. We do maintain surveillance, and I won't go into the details of how or what forms or mechanisms, and we do have the capabilities to conduct strike operations if we see a threat emanating from the land of Afghanistan. But I'd prefer to take the rest of it into a classified session.
Thank you. I think you heard quite a bit from this committee concerns about the Navy and shipbuilding and the number of ships, and we're going to have the Secretary of Navy in front of us, so I'm sure he's got a preview of what will be coming their way. One point that I spoke with you, Secretary Austin, when we met over a couple of months ago in the Senate, and you, General Milley, is the role of any, if possible, to repurpose, maybe even work with the Coast Guard with any of the littoral combat ships in the Atlantic. China is also making inroads and wanting to be in the Atlantic, and there might be a mission that they can be refitted for, repurposed for, not all of them, but working together with you. And I know that that's going to be pencil to paper to figure out if that's smart and if that works, and working with AFRICOM and with the Baton Commander in Latin America. But there's a simple fact here. The United States does not have the shipbuilding industrial base to manufacture, let alone maintain a Navy that can completely numerically compete with China. But quantity alone is not the point. It's quality and capability that matter, as you gentlemen pointed out. China might have 500 ships, but half of those ships are small support vessels that have no qualitative edge over a U.S. combat ship. The debate, I believe, needs to be very substantiated and not just picking a number that we think might be for the right number of ships for the U.S. to have. That's why the concept of an integrated deterrence is so important, and the new National Defense Strategy talks quite a bit about this. The idea that it's necessary to confront China as a united front with our Pacific allies, that we do not do it alone. We have the support of the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Australians. And only by leveraging our collective strength as democracies, as democratic nations, as we have done with NATO and as we are doing right now in the battle for Ukraine to be a free and sovereign nation, we need to bring all our assets together. So for the record, China, as I said, has about 500 ships, 230 are smaller support vessels. The United States has 290 combat vessels. Japan has smaller support vessels, but they have 154. South Korea has 160 ships. Some are small support vessels, and Australia has 43. So as we talk about how to right-size the number of ships we have, but also repair the ships that need to come in, we're going to have some real in-depth discussions with the Secretary of Navy about what's happening in our shipyards. Another item that this committee needs to work on, and shipbuilding involves the public-private partnerships that we have. It also involves Milcon, and it also involves the authorizers. Mr. Calvert and I just don't do this alone. We're going to have robust discussions. Another place where robust discussions have to take place, because at the end of the day, we're the bill payer, needs to be on base realignment. Once again, that's going to be the authorizers. It needs to be Milcon and our committee. And these are uncomfortable discussions to have, I realize it. But BRAC, which is under the preview of the authorizers and the Military Construction Subcommittee, have to start working with us to address these issues. I want to fully state my support for a new round of BRAC. The department has stated in recent years that it has nearly 20% excess infrastructure, and we pay for that infrastructure to be maintained, and it's doing nothing. Many of our installations were aligned and built in the wake of World War II, and as we have clearly discussed today, the world has changed. A new round of BRAC is necessary, and I believe it could save taxpayers billions of dollars, and it could also save the department a lot of time and energy expenditures maintaining something that is not useful to the department anymore. I'm now asking you to comment on these issues. We will be submitting questions for the record and questions for the Secretary. So I want to thank you both for coming. I want to thank you for answering our questions live today and taking all the questions that are coming your way in written form. And I also want to give a special thank you and I think you'll agree with me, to Mr. McCord. You are on call. You are in my office frequently. You take questions that this committee staff works on as we prepare the budget, and so that we have the best bill possible to make sure that our national defense needs are met. So thank you again. Thank you for all those who serve under you, with you, and your families. And this will conclude today's hearing, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.